And when I argue that no, technology is here to serve people, they say, oh, Doug, you only say that because you're human. As if it's hubris to be arguing. And that's when I said, yeah, hell right, I'm on team human. Meaning I am on team human.
So it's a real pleasure to be here to talk today about Douglas Rushkoff. I spend a lot of time talking with people about media technology and communications in sort of enforced conditions, which is to say I teach courses about it. And one of the frequent things that I hear when I assign a reading, a film, or anything is that it's not relatable. It's an interesting thing to want from something you read or from an idea, that it be relatable. Because what's relatable is easy to understand. What's easy to understand isn't always a question of vocabulary, though, but of saying something that might be already familiar. So worst case, it's repeating something that's already taken for granted. So even if it's new, it can easily be assimilated into our routines and habits. Yet there's another way of talking about something being relatable. And this is the best case of things being relatable. This is a way of talking about how an author speaks to us about something we know or have imagined or have felt or experienced but didn't have words for. So being relatable in a bad way is easy, so like Chicken Fingers or Taylor Swift. But being relatable in a good way is hard, which brings me this evening to our speaker, Douglas Rushkoff. He's the author of 12 books on topics related to media, technology, and contemporary culture. He's the director of numerous documentaries, the author of 2 novels and 3 graphic novels, author of a comic book as well. He's a member of the faculty at Queen's College of the City University of New York, where he's a professor of media theory and digital economy. And since the publication of his first book, Siberia, in 1994, he's established himself as one of the most perceptive public intellectuals thinking about media and technology. He's an heir to the work of Marshall McLuhan. He has helped us come to grips with our contemporary technological condition, giving us concepts like viral media, even if we didn't put his name to the noun. But Dr. Rushkoff is not a futurist gazing outwards towards a future that might never arrive, but I think we could call him a presentist in the best sense of the word. He writes about and from the ever-oncoming here and now in which we find ourselves and that we face every day with a mixture of excitement, boredom, and terror. And his most recent book, Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, continues in this tradition. It is an expansive yet approachable discussion of the limitations of the digital economy that both documents how we got here, going all the way back to the 13th century, yet opening some paths forward towards a sustainable and equitable society. It is, like all of Dr. Rushkoff's work, relatable in the best sense. It is a book that deals with complicated yet important ideas that help us understand how we live, describing experiences, both good and bad, that sit just at the edge of our awareness, in the shadows of how we normally think about ourselves and the world around us. In part, this is due to Dr. Rushkoff's voracious and dogged curiosity about technology and culture, as well as his keen critical perception. Yet it is also relatable because it is motivated by a deeply humane commitment to all the potential people that his works may bring together. So those of us that are here, but those of us that couldn't make it tonight, but hopefully one day will. So looking forward to our conversation, I introduce you to Douglas Rushkoff. All right, so let's start with throwing rocks at the Google bus. He multitasks, he pours water, he answers questions. It begins with an account of the protests against Google buses in San Francisco in 2012 by anti-gentrification protests.
Right.
That's not the beginning of the book, though. Could you talk a little bit about where the ideas behind the book sort of came together for you?
For me, and we can speak frankly here.
We can.
We'll see if it's still...
Can we?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
We'll see if it's still relatable.
Yeah.
For me, things changed on really one day in, I guess it was 1995. Netscape, which was a browser, but it was a browser developed originally, as Mosaic, as a nonprofit university shareware phenomenon. Netscape went public, meaning they sold their shares on Wall Street. And on that same day, Jerry Garcia, the guitarist for the Grateful Dead, died. And for me, that was the moment that the peer-to-peer, nonprofit, human-centered development path of digital technology pivoted to Wired magazine's vision of an attention economy that could expand forever and bring new levels of prosperity to shareholders around the world. And at the time, it was just sad. I was a Gen Xer, right? So it was like, oh, it's sad that we sold out, and the great net is now part of, the sold-out yuppie scum universe. What I didn't realize was that from that moment on, digital technology was going to be used to not just enable, but to amplify and exacerbate the most extractive, dehumanizing aspects of corporate capitalism. That it was going to take what the British East India Company did to the Americas, what Walmart did to towns across the United States, and amp it up in this almost asymptotically exponential version of extraction. And it was just sad. It was sad to me. So, I wrote a bunch of books after that arguing just sort of positive, well, the net could be good for this, or remember this, remember networking, remember people, yay. But it finally, once people were throwing rocks at the Google bus, once it had gotten so obvious that this team, the two good guys, two kids from their Stanford dorm room, came up with an algorithm that took down big bad Yahoo. It was really the story of Google, that it was going to be a people-driven kind of a peer-to-peer algorithm where instead of having a corporation decide how the net was organized, the popularity and the links that we give to one another and the clicking that we do is going to create a bottom-up new organization of information, that these two kids now have a company that is so big that it is destroying the real-world community where it exists. And, we know how that happens because the town got over-gentrified, and these workers were, returning back and forth from Mountain View to San Francisco, like aliens returning to their mothership, while real people were getting priced out of their neighborhoods and small businesses were closing. And it just became this perfect metaphor, but also the reality, but a perfect metaphor for the way we were using digital technology really just to extract value from real people and places and convert it into this abstract share price. And somehow that phenomenon, along with that growing sensibility that, money and capital, they scale, just like digital technology does. And people and places don't scale. We're here. And that disconnect was going to take us down an increasingly dark path unless we take a turn.
So does it come together? One of the questions I had was, did your views on these sorts of issues shift around things like the financial crisis of 2008? Did they shift in relationship, or do you see this sort of as just sort of the extension of precisely those sorts of trends from extractive digital capitalism?
It's not that I don't think my views shifted, but I think the world shifted. In the early 90s, I'm writing Siberia, celebrating the new cyberpunk ethos and hypertext and fantasy role-playing games and, all this cool new stuff that was going to happen and what that would mean, what augmenting people would really mean. But I guess that it was more the seeing things that didn't make sense. So I saw my once friend, Evan Williams, one of the founders of Twitter. I saw him. I knew him back in the blogger days. A bunch of us lent him, $50 or $100 at a time just to keep that little thing going, which launched the blog. And now he was the founder of Twitter on the cover of the Wall Street Journal with the number 4.3 billion under his face, which was the amount of money he had earned the morning of the IPO. And I had this torn feeling. On the one hand, it's like, wow, one of us made it. And on the other hand, I was thinking, if you'll pardon my French, what I actually thought was, this guy is fucked. right? Because they gave him $4.3 billion, expecting him to somehow return $430 billion. He's supposed to have 100x, 1,000x returns. And here's Twitter today making $2 billion a year off a 140-character messaging app, which is pretty good, right? 140 characters at $2 billion. This is great. But it's considered an abject failure by Wall Street because it seems that $2 billion is about all you can make off a 140-character messaging app. That's about it. But they're not allowed to stop. They have to grow. They have to answer this other call. So I guess what shocked me was that developers, technology developers, who are so deeply aware of operating systems like the Mac or Intel's machine code. They're really aware of operating systems. We're completely oblivious to the operating system under which all of their companies were running. They accepted the rules of the venture capital Wall Street economy as if they were pre-existing conditions of nature, rather than an operating system that was invented by very particular people at particular moments in history with particular agendas who have long since left the building. And now it's as if the business people, they just take the book out of the loose leaf book out of the desk and go, all right, what are we supposed to do? We do this, then we do that. And it's like, wait a minute, this operating system is incompatible with the technologies and with the people that the technologies are supposed to be serving. So that's then what I wanted to write and say, no, we can take, so it's the same trajectory for me, that open source insight of everything's an operating system. All these operating systems can be retooled. We're living in a designer reality where people can get their hands on the dashboard of creation and applying that now, rather than just to technology or experiences or VR, applying it to the economy itself and helping business in particular and investors see this stuff is fungible. These laws are not written in stone, that this is a game. It's a zero-sum economic game that has a very particular history. And I thought if I unearthed it, if I explained it, then people would go, oh, you know, it was written then, and we can change this code.
So one of the things I did find that was interesting is that it is a business book, right? It's positioned as a business book. I had to trundle off to the business section to find it.
Yeah, an anti-business book.
An anti-business.
Or a pro-commerce, pro-good commerce.
Yeah, but it's also a book about, or at least as I understood it, a book about democracy in a really fundamental sense, that economic democracy is essential if there is to be what we would consider political, social, cultural, all the other forms of democracy, that you can't have just one form and not the other. Which sort of leads me to a particular question, which, as I said, I feel incumbent to ask every visitor from the Southland who comes up, right? So Donald Trump, right?
Who?
I mean, and not just Donald Trump, what's up, but Donald Trump, how in some ways, you've written some really fantastic articles about how Donald Trump is the epitome of both the internet, culture, a sort of marriage of high technology, but also these old, dark, scary things that have lingered in the attic of the 20th century that come back with a vengeance. And I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about that, but also what that means for kind of what you were talking about in terms of good commerce. I mean, he is in some ways proposing to fundamentally rewrite, or wants to, precisely the operating system of capitalism to become even more abstractive. So I guess sort of a two-part question, right? So, the first is, how do you see the Trump phenomena? And then the second part is, what does it mean for our potential?
Well, I mean, for the most part, I see the Trump phenomenon in a kind of through a maybe McLuhan-esque lens. So I think that we're living in a digital media environment, and that we've transitioned from a television media environment, electronic media environment, to this digital one. And television was a global medium. It really was. If you remember, if you're old like me, you remember the moon landing or Peggy Fleming. There were these moments, these television moments were simultaneous global moments where we all experienced the same thing at the same moment. And the television culture engendered the internationalism and globalism of Europe and the Euro and this kind of hands around the world, big blue marble ethos. You know, the epitome of a television presidency is Ronald Reagan standing in front of the Brandenburg Gate saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Television. That's television. Digital media, in some ways, is the opposite. Digital media is discrete. Yes, no. Are you here or here? Here or here. It's like a snap to grid, where everything is a radio button. Everything is discrete. Even digital music. It's not the smooth, curved, linear music out of your analog records. It's discrete little samples, 20,000 of them a second, but it's still each little sample, this, then this, then this, then this, then this. So the kind of, the ethos that it engenders is one of boundaries. That's why you, instead of getting Reagan saying, tear down this wall, you get Donald Trump saying, I'm going to build a wall. You know, you get Brexit. This is our country. These are our boundaries. We are not part of this. I don't want to melt into Europe and be part of that. I want to be us and them. What country are you from? Who are these immigrants? They're from somewhere else. It's them. So Trump embodied that. The other thing that's embodied in a digital age, the other great bias of digital media is memory. The whole thing is built on memory. All processing happens in memory and RAM and memory. So what do we get? The memory. Make America great again. You know, when was Brexit? When was Britain great Britain? Let's bring back, they're false memories, of course, but it's memory. It's all this idea of things being back there. So when you combine memory and boundary, you get, you know, that Trumpness. And of course, Trump also speaks as if he's a, you know, in the trolling comments section of 4chan or something. That's the dialogue. He's a troll. He is a troll. You know, it's why then the way a troll works is you make a point, and then the troll says something about you personally in order to get you off the subject. And then you fight. People can't help it. Then they go down that rabbit hole. It's like they haven't learned that those behaviors that we've learned not to do online, we have to learn not to do them in real life. So there's all that stuff and that kind of nastiness, right? That's the bad part. The interesting silver lining in it for me is that Trump's boundaried approach to the world in some ways is an antidote to this kind of global neoliberalism, that's this long distance extraction of value from places far, far away. You know, I wouldn't think it's the healthiest way of developing local economy is not to put walls around your economy, but for the extent to which it creates an opportunity for communities to say, oh my gosh, we're in this alone. We're in this for ourselves. If we're going to have an economy, it's not going to be government giving money to a bank, giving money to a factory to open up a plant and give us jobs. That's what Trump talks about. That's over. You know, that's over. That doesn't work. But what we could do is develop, and that's sort of, I guess, what this book is about, is reclaim the mechanisms that we used to have to do local bounded economic development. You know, a bounded condition just means trying to earn the same dollar 10 times rather than taking $10 off the table. You know, the way an Amazon works, or an Uber works, or a Walmart works, is by going into a marketplace and sucking out all the money that's there. You know, making everybody poor. You know, paying the lowest wages possible, putting everyone else out of business. So everyone's dependent on that. You establish a monopoly, make the place bankrupt, and then move on to the next one. That's not economic development. That's just extraction. Whereas if you start thinking of economics as what are the transactions going on between the people there, you could start coming up with the new models, like what the Teamsters did after the 2007 stock market crash. They didn't want to take their retirement savings and put it in S&P 500 index funds anymore because the market wasn't doing well. So what the Teamsters did was they took their money, their retirement money, and they invested it in construction projects that hire Teamsters. People first got upset. They said, oh my God, this must be illegal. You can't invest in things. It's not illegal. So they were double dipping, right? They're investing in projects and then getting that money right back in salary. And then they thought, as long as we're double dipping, why don't we triple dip? And they started investing in construction projects of retirement homes for their parents that would also hire them to build them. So now they're getting their parents' retirement homes, they're getting salary, and they're getting their pension investment all in the same money. That's triple dipping. That's using the same dollar multiple times. So what I'm arguing for people to do is to move towards what we would call kind of a flow-based economy instead of a growth-based economy. The growth is the booby prize. Growth extracts value from people and places, whereas flow keeps it circulating between people and places.
Right. And in terms of that, though, I mean, one of the things that we see around this, I mean, the question I was going to ask you later, which I'm just going to ask you now, is that it sounds like at some level it's economic populism that you're advocating for, in the sense that it is an economy for the people in which the people's needs would be served. Yet in some ways it's fundamentally different from the kinds or versions of populism that someone like Trump would espouse, who is fundamentally a growth-based populist, right? Economy of 4% growth year over year is the promise that he's hoping 5%, whatever, outrageous, impossible, fundamentally impossible numbers. And so I guess the question is, and this was sort of something that came to me as I was reading the book again, right, is to think about in this moment in which the dangers of populist waves, how does one break off from that to, I guess, what one could call either progressive populism, populism that won't, run people out of town with pitchforks and flames? How?
Okay, so populism doesn't work if you have the wrong idea of what people are. So if you've bought the Western European colonial excuse for wiping out peoples, which is some bastardized Darwinian competitive struggle, then yeah, your populism is going to be a fight. We all have the right to fight, to march to the top of the hill, and anyone can grab that flag who's got the power to grab it. Then you're going to get that kind of populism, which is really dark and icky. If, on the other hand, you see the human species as the result of a increase in the ability to socialize, if you believe that food sharing is what allowed for human beings to evolve into what we are, and cooperation and collaboration, then you look at populism as how do we instrumentalize higher levels of collaboration and cooperation between people. Then you start looking at favor banks and local currencies and community-supported agriculture as populism. So it's really two different kinds.
Right. And I mean, I guess this brings me to another project that you've been working on recently, which is the Team Human podcast. Right. I mean, maybe you're less of a populist and more of a humanist, could we say?
Yeah.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about what is Team Human?
Being a humanist in Silicon Valley today is being countercultural. Right? The underlying assumption in the technology community is that human beings are the problem and technology is the solution. That's why the chief scientist at Google thinks that this day is shortly going to come called the singularity, when computers surpass humans, and that's when we should pass the torch to our evolutionary successors, the silicon chips. And that's a good day, and that from that point on, people will really only be needed insofar as we can keep the machines running. And once we're not needed for that, computers are more complex, computers are less evil, computers don't have problems, they don't have neurosis. Upload what you can to the silicon chips, and then let them continue on. And when I argue that no, technology is here to serve people, they say, oh, Doug, you only say that because you're human. As if it's hubris to be arguing. And that's when I said, yeah, hell right, I'm on Team Human. Meaning I am on Team Human. And I mean, hopefully I'm a bit more, I'm on Team Life or Team Nature. And I'm not humans against the animals, but Team Human in terms of...
That's a different movie.
Yeah. But you know what I mean. Humans have their problems. You shouldn't cut down a tree either, without acknowledging that you're killing perhaps unnecessarily. But I'm thinking more humans have, back to McLuhan, humans have become... They've moved from being the figure to being the ground. And they've moved from being the subject to being the landscape. You are not the subject of your smartphone. You are the object of your smartphone. You are not the customer of Facebook. You are the product of Facebook. Your smartphone is playing you. It's getting smarter about you every touch you make as you get dumber about it. So that's the reversal that I'm hoping to correct, and not by scaring people of technology, but by getting people to fall in love with the humans. With this is our team. These are this is our side. And so many of the technologies and systems and institutions that we build originally to help us connect and collaborate with other people end up doing the opposite. Even the market was originally about extending our ability to share with each other more efficiently, and it's become the opposite. It's become a way of competing with each other and hoarding from each other. So that's the reversal, and particularly when we are now programming algorithms and machines that can program themselves. The agendas that we embed in digital technology are a little bit different than the ones we embedded in our industrial age machinery, because these will go on without us. They are evolving themselves. They are iterating themselves. So I think it's a window of opportunity for us to embed these technologies with what I would consider pro-human values, rather than the values you get watching Westworld or zombie TV shows, which are always about humans being the problem. What's the difference between me and that zombie walking on the horizon? That's in every one of those Walking Dead shows. There's always someone looking at a zombie thinking, well, the zombie eats and I eat. The zombie kills and I kill. What's really the difference? As if that's some great, some profound... What's the difference is that's a zombie! It's a zombie. You're a human. You're a human. You have agency. You have autonomy. You can experience love and connection with others and intimacy and dream and hope. I mean, come on, people. And that's what I'm going to be working on next. With on the Team Human, I do a podcast called Team Human. You can go teamhuman.fm and hear it every week, where I talk to people about these kinds of issues. And I'm doing a book that's looking at that too. Really asking, how do we restore our not our faith, but our belief and confidence in our species? Why not? It's because without us, really, there's not going to be any thinking people around. The systems will run, but who will know?
Well, yeah. They will.
They, okay.
Well, I mean, because that touches on another sort of question. You talk a little bit about it in the book, which comes, about artificial intelligence, right? And I mean, I sort of have two questions here. One would be sort of to think a little bit about, like, what do we as humans then want from AI? I mean, because it seems that there's some aspect of it which is not merely foisted upon us, but actively welcomed. Is it that we seek out our own stupidity? Is it that we...
Well, the bad part of AI is that we're using it mostly in order to predict human behavior and ultimately guide human behavior, make us more predictable. So Mark Zuckerberg takes your past activity on Facebook to market to you the future that you don't yet know you're going to live. Right. But he knows it because they have the machine learning and AI to figure out what's your most likely path. And then if they know that 80% of people are going to go down that path, let's say they know for 80% that I'm going to go on a diet in the next 4 weeks, their job is not just to sell me which diet, but to make that 80% chance go up to 90% or 95. They don't want that anomalous 20% out there doing unpredictable things. So that's what AI is being used for now, is to make humans more predictable, to make machines more novel and people more machine-like. What AI could be used for, just like any of these technologies, would be, to bring on the fantasy of us getting to drink iced tea while the robots till the fields, and take care of us to the extent that we want, so that we can just go and have fun and paint and make video games or have sex or do whatever humans really want to do. We can't bring ourselves to do that, again, because of our economic model. California, we're tearing down houses because they're in foreclosure. We can't let homeless people live in them because they don't have jobs. They don't have jobs because we have more than enough stuff already. We have nothing for them to do. So jobs now have, rather than where jobs may have once, or work may have once been about us contributing to the needs of the community, now jobs are a way of justifying partaking in the spoils of industrialism. We're living with a surplus of stuff. We burn food every week in the United States, USDA, to keep market prices high. So there's an ass backwardsness to this. So yeah, if we can take charge of our economy and start seeing the purpose of the economy is to enable the distribution of both goods and the means of productions to the widest group of people possible, then AI becomes an extension, really. It becomes intelligence augmentation rather than artificial intelligence. It becomes the ways that we extend our abilities, not the way we extend the reach of an abstract, extractive marketplace.
Sounds convincing. I'm with you.
Thank
I'd
you.
like to join Team Human.
You are. You're on Team
Yeah.
Human. They're all on Team Human. Sometimes they don't know it.
I saw Westworld too. I mean, and sort of circulating then, I guess, in the background of some of these ideas you've been talking about here around Team Human, around the notion of what a human-centered economy would be like. And you already sort of mentioned this a little bit, and it's through the book in different ways as well, is the question of scale, right? And about a month ago, I saw a really fantastic roundtable over at U of T with the poet and critic Fred Moten, and he said, I do not think, and he was talking about sort of the chances for fundamental social and political change. He said, I do not know if scale is our friend. And reading your book, I sort of was coming back to these sort of similar thoughts. But the other side of this is to say, if scale is not our friend, and if scale is on the side of whatever the other team is called, right? Team capital, team machine, team
Scale,
inhuman,
yeah.
anti-human. How do we get from here to there? Because scale seems not just to be about big and small, but about power over. And so I think, maybe some of your thoughts around scale would be an interesting way into this, but also how we can use the small or the local, or the near, or the intimate, as a way of beginning for some Team Human victories?
Some things can happen at scale and be fine. It's going to be hard to get iPhones and Fiats and things without some global supply chain things happening at scale. Growing Swiss chard works better not at scale. And most of the things that seem more efficient because they're operating at scale only seem more efficient because they've externalized the true costs of running at scale. The cost to the environment, the cost to labor, the roads that get built, the armies that have to be raised, all those things are external to the corporate profit. When I started to think the most about scale was back when I started to read, for this book, I started to read Adam Smith and all the old great economists, and they talk about there being three main factors of production: land, labor, and capital to produce anything. You need the land that the minerals or the stuff comes out of, the plants come out of, the labor to till the soil or to make the stuff, and then the capital, which is the money to build the factory or to start the business. In a digital economy, capital is the only one that has a seat at the table. The VC is the one who tells the kid, that idea you have for an app that's going to let people do all these things, let's pivot that over here. And pivot means abandon your original people-serving circulatory idea and do this one that we can sell the whole company in 18 months for 100 times what I paid for it idea. And those are ideas that have to scale. If your company's going to scale, it means it can't have workers. Because if wait a minute, there's humans. You need humans for that process? That's not going to scale. It's only going to scale if there's nothing there but software. So we end up only promoting businesses that can operate on this abstracted, ginormous scale. And what happens to land? You get climate change. What happens to labor? We get a disenfranchised workforce. So the people and the places are left behind as this weird abstract digital economy keeps happening. Now that weird abstract digital scaled economy is perfectly fine with Google and Kurzweil and AI and the singularity because they're just going to run off. But what about those of us who are left down here in unscalable planet Earth? That's why I'm trying to give, and I keep putting lots of ideas in there, like the one I was talking about that the steelworkers did, of how can people come to recognize that if you have people with needs and people with skills, you have the basis for an economy. That it doesn't have to get financialized, that all you need is a means of transaction between those people. Right now, that means of transaction is really expensive because financiers have gamed the system. You have to borrow money from the central treasury in order to do any transaction. You've got to pay back that money at interest, which means the economy has to grow. It doesn't have to grow organically by nature. It has to grow because of the tool that we are using. A tool which we didn't used to use. This is why I go to history, back in medieval times, we had a scaled economy. There was problems in medieval times too. People could just throw a rock and kill you. But, you got diseases and there was a lot of icky stuff. But there was we had the city-state instead of the nation-state, and there was a scaled economy built around the marketplace. And we had many different kinds of money. The money then was more like poker chips. It wasn't really valuable in itself. It was just a marker that let you transact. So people wouldn't hoard that money. It often expired at the end of the day. But it was money that was optimized for the velocity of transactions to jumpstart, to prime the pump of the marketplace during the day. When the kings wanted to make money, families that hadn't worked for 1,000 years and were losing their wealth as the middle class was getting wealthy, what did? They made that money illegal. They said, now you have to use only coin from the central treasury, what we came to call coin of the realm. So now money has to be borrowed at interest and paid back, and it worked as long as we had expanding colonial empires. The English Empire worked at scale. It was scale. They took over continents. What happens once it pushes back? How does the economy still work at scale? It kind of doesn't. It kind of can't. And still have room for the humans. We're going to have to extract too much stuff out of the planet too fast for there to even be an environment for us to live in, much less one for us to have jobs in. So yeah, I'm all for returning to, not to the Middle Ages, but retrieving some of the mechanisms that we had that were forcibly repressed, that were made illegal. And that is ideas like the commons, as Anna was saying. That's why it's great we're in a library. At least a library lets people understand, what tragedy of the commons? This is a great place. I can get a book and read it and bring it back and share it. And I get why I'm not tearing up the book. So the next person can read it. So as long as people have examples of these things, then all of the propaganda that tried to argue that this was communism or some bad thing, none of that propaganda really means anything because we have lived experiences of the alternative local economic reality.